Hi BookTube, and welcome to this, the final vlog, taking a look at my reading of Virginia Rounding's biography of Catherine the Great. This was the last book I finished in April, and we got right down to the wire, reading the last pages on the evening of the 30th and going to bed a bit later than my usual time. We ended the previous vlog when Catherine became a grandmother in 1777. Now you'll remember when Catherine became a mother, when the Grand Duke Paul was born, he was taken from her. She didn't even get a chance to hold him, and his upbringing was completely supervised by his grandmother, the Empress Elizabeth. Now when Catherine becomes a grandmother, she takes possession of her grandson Alexander in the exact same fashion, which surprised me. I thought she might remember her own misery and want to do something different. Rounding tries to excuse it. I think she suspects that Catherine wanted to take for herself the chance to be maternal, the chance that she was not given with her own son. Here you can see a painting done of the Grand Duke Paul. He's riding the white horse. He's also got the Habsburg Emperor Joseph riding behind him, who's got the red headdress. And his son, Alexander, is in the foreground on the brown horse, and Constantine, his second son, is in the very background there on the dark horse. Of course, none of this taking children away from their parents, and none of it's going to be healthy for her grandchildren emotionally. Alexander became caught up in the middle of the discord between his grandmother and his parents, and he struggled with that pressure. He longed to escape. Alexander's younger brother Constantine also grew up to become quite a disturbed young man. Possibly the only thing we can say about Catherine's child-rearing methods was that she took some inspiration, some good inspiration, from Jean-Jacques Rousseau's book Émile, which was published in 1762, and implemented those changes in the physical treatment of her grandchildren. I'm going to read some of those rules from page 321 of the book. She says, "Children should not be dressed or covered too warmly, either in winter or summer. It is better that children should also sleep at night without a bonnet. As often as possible, children should be washed in cold water. They should wear slight shoes without heels. For the first year, they should have bare head and feet. It would be good to teach a child to swim as soon as it is old enough. Make them go out often in the fresh air. Let them stay near the fire as little as possible, even in winter. Let them play in the wind, in the sun, and in the rain without a hat. Children's clothes should never be tight, especially around the chest." These rules were designed to be the opposite of the way Catherine saw the Empress Elizabeth treat the Grand Duke Paul when he was young. Catherine believed that the way Paul was always kept too wrapped up and protected, and that it contributed to his frequent illnesses that he had when he was a child. In the late 1770s, Catherine was finishing her 40s, starting her 50s. She began to have health issues. In her writings, you can see she's mystified by all these various symptoms. She guesses at the cause. She's more tired. She finds she can't concentrate. She doesn't really want to read and write the way she normally does. She's not getting as much of the daily business of government done. She's moody. She's having a lot of trouble sleeping, and randomly she'll suffer terrible headaches. Of course, now we would just diagnose perimenopause, but in the general ignorance of the day, everyone, I think, assumed that she was somehow, that she'd lost some of her former faculty as a ruler, and she lost respect amongst her courtiers and from her son. She'd already lost respect from him, but it got greater than that. She continued to take new lovers, and most of those were selected for her by Grigory Potemkin, that man who she either did or did not secretly marry. The age gap between Catherine and her lovers, that was kind of hard to get my head around. It got wider as she got older. She was having men in her bed who were the same age as her son, which just very difficult for the 21st century mind to wrap itself around. Potemkin, oddly, remained very close to her throughout his life. The lovers, they lasted maybe a couple of years before Catherine got bored of them, or they were discovered to be having affairs with younger women, and they'd be pensioned off, given a sort of a comfortable start in a new life. So bizarre as it seems to me, it must have seemed to those at the time as a way for a promising young man to get his first step up into society. The biggest surprise in the latter third of this book was learning that Catherine the Great was a playwright. I can't vouch for how good her plays were. Rounding doesn't reproduce any part of the scripts in the book, but the Empress was prolific. I found one printed collection of these works. Let me put that on screen. And it's another of those astoundingly expensive books titled The Dramatic Works of Catherine the Great by Lorana Donnells O'Malley. And even the Kindle edition is £40 or $50 US. I've mentioned in earlier vlogs that Rounding's biography is very pro-Catherine, right? It is biased. But as the Empress ages, in spite of the bias, you can see signs that her hold on power is less secure. Grand Duke Paul reached his majority. He married, he produced a male heir, 2 male heirs, but he was given absolutely no role in the governing of the country that he was destined to rule. Catherine gave him nothing. She deliberately withheld any responsibility, and the depth of the distrust that she had for her son became evident after her death, when Paul discovered papers that she'd drawn up that were, plans to deny him the succession and pass the crown on instead to the next generation, to his first son, Alexander. Rounding suggested that Catherine believed her son was just too much like his father and he would not make a good ruler. Privately, I wonder if she also realized the son's depth of feeling for his father, and this is an expression of it. I'm going to read a rather long passage, but I think it's really it's quite dramatic and impactful, from pages 503 to 504. We're talking about events just after Catherine's death. Later that day, an autopsy was performed on the body of the late Empress, confirming the cause of death as a cerebral stroke. After the Empress' body had been embalmed, the courtiers and ladies-in-waiting, maids of honor, high officials and knights were ordered to keep watch beside her day and night in 2-hour shifts. This vigil was to last throughout the first 6 weeks of mourning. Paul, Maria his wife, and all the imperial family came twice a day to meditate by her body and kiss the deceased's hand. Meanwhile, the tomb of Catherine's late husband had been opened by the order of the new emperor and in the presence of the Metropolitan of Petersburg. The coffin had been removed and placed in the Church of the Annunciation at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery. On the 15th of November, a procession made its way from Catherine's bedroom, with torches, incense, and the chanting of funeral psalms, through the Knights' Guard room, its floor, ceiling, and walls shrouded in black, and into the throne room. Behind the clergy came the imperial family, and finally the body of Catherine II, dressed in silver silk brocade and wearing all her decorations, borne on a magnificent bier covered with the imperial mantle. At the conclusion of the religious ceremony, the imperial family took it in turns to prostrate themselves before the body and kiss Catherine's hand. The family then withdrew. A priest came to stand before the throne and began the reading of the Gospels, and 6 members of the imperial guard took up their positions around the bier. That same day, a ceremony mirroring that of the late Empress's solemn procession to the throne room was carried out at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery, as the coffin containing the remains of Peter III was carried in an equally solemn procession the short distance from the Church of the Annunciation to the Cathedral of the Holy Trinity. Here, the coffin was opened. Peter's body not having been embalmed, it was found to contain only his hat, gloves, boots, and dust. A requiem was sung for him in the cathedral 5 days later, a cortege of 42 carriages making its way there from the Winter Palace, and Paul venerated the dust of his father, commanding his family to do the same. On 25th November, the Empress Catherine's body was placed in a coffin, a gold crown on her head, and carried to the Great Gallery, where in happier times balls were held. Here the coffin was placed on an elevated structure beneath a black velvet canopy with a silver fringe. 6 candles were positioned round the coffin. A priest once again read the Gospels continuously, and members of the Imperial Guard stood on the steps. At the same time, at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery, the imperial crown, which had been brought from Moscow, was placed on Peter's coffin, now resealed, in an act of posthumous coronation. On 3rd December, a sunny day of intense cold, Peter's coffin was loaded onto a wheeled platform pulled by 8 horses and brought in slow and solemn state from the Alexander Nevsky Monastery to the Winter Palace. The Emperor Paul walked behind the coffin, followed by all the high-ranking court officials. The emperor ensured that those who had played a part in his father's downfall and death were also participants in his posthumous restoration. Prince Bariatinski and Governor General Pasek were ordered to walk in the cortege, and Count Alexei Orlov was given the dubious honor of carrying the imperial crown on a cushion. Count Orlov bore himself on the occasion with a calm and resolute dignity, firm of tread and face impassive. The procession, accompanied by cannon fire, stretched the length of the Nevsky Prospect and took several hours to reach its destination. On arrival at the Winter Palace, Peter's coffin was placed beside Catherine's. So it was, lying alongside her former spouse, whom she had despised and overthrown, that the late Empress received the homage of her subjects, who were now permitted to file past the double coffins. This was seen by many as an insult to Catherine's memory, an act of disrespect to a mother by her son, and it did nothing to endear the new Tsar to his people. The coffins lay exposed together for 2 days. Then, after the funeral service on 5th December, they were carried to the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul, the traditional burying place of the Romanovs. Inside the cathedral, the two remained exposed to public view for a fortnight before being buried next to one another beneath marble tombs, on which Paul had inscripted their dates of birth and burial, but not their dates of death. He had thus done all he could to make it appear as though Peter III had reigned alongside Catherine II. He was by no means the last among the rulers of Russia to attempt to rewrite history. I believe another sign of Catherine's insecurity was that she never left Russian territory. Monarchs came to her. Frederick the Great, Joseph, the Holy Roman Emperor, the kings of Sweden and Poland came to her. Rounding never says it, but I couldn't think of any reason why Catherine would never travel, except that she feared that a coup would happen in her absence. She did send the Grand Duke Paul and his Duchess on a tour of Austria and France, but of course she didn't allow them to take their sons with them. And Catherine's reaction to the French Revolution reveals the limits to her concept of enlightenment. She was horrified, like all other European monarchs were, at the thought of government by the lower orders. And though Catherine had read Voltaire and respected him, somehow she did not see, until it was pointed out to her, that the French thinker had always advocated a change to the existing political order. And once she understood that, she renounced him. Now, that being said, in comparison with the Russian rulers who succeeded her, Catherine's questionable liberalism was a lesser evil. Her son was as bad as she feared he would be. He was self-important to the point where he insisted that anyone, no matter what the situation or weather, should kneel when he passed, even if that meant stopping a carriage, getting out and kneeling in the snow. One of the first laws that Paul passed forbade any woman to assume the throne. He reigned for 5 years and was assassinated by his own courtiers. Alexander, Paul's son, earned some distinction because he was the Tsar who defeated Napoleon Bonaparte. But the cause of his sudden death in 1825 remains completely unknown, and his body was never on public display. His younger brother Nicholas came to the throne in the midst of revolt, carried out repressive measures to secure his power. 8 attempts were made to assassinate Nicholas's son Alexander II, the last one finally being successful. I could go on, but you get the picture, right? I highly recommend this biography for the same reasons I've given in the previous vlogs. It has been well researched, and yet it's not written for an academic audience. It feels like a collection of anecdotes, and yet there's also a lot of information imparted. As you can tell from the passage that I read, there are a lot of detail. Rounding retains this thumping good story quality throughout the book, and that could be partly due to the larger-than-life quality of Catherine herself. The cast of characters is vast, and yet I found I did retain recall of the most influential people, and I never felt it mattered that I had to be reminded of the others. That didn't seem to disturb my reading. And that's it, everyone. Thanks so much for coming on this reading journey with me. In my usual fashion, I'm going to be veering off in a completely different nonfiction direction next. And I'm going to read Jennifer Ackerman's highly acclaimed book, The Bird Way, which has new insights into avian behavior. And I think Amazon puts it as she upending the traditional view of how birds live. Well, I love a bit of tradition upending. I hope your May reading is going well, and I will see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.